my worry is that we could find ourselves in a very similar situation in the middle of January.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Well, I love talking with you about ag issues, ag markets, anything ag related, and especially today. Today we're going to cover some important stuff, and it's related to the transportation of getting ag products to the export shipping channels, and also we have some new breaking news for you too. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Right now, my guest, Mike Steenhoek. He's with the Soybean Transportation Coalition, kind of a regular guest here on the Comstock channel. And Mike, first off, I wanted to ask you about the situation with river levels. Here we are coming down the tail end of harvest, and man, I'm hearing a lot of talk about people saying we just can't shove the commodities down the river because they can't load the barges up enough. Is that going to be relieved with this current rain or not?
Well, we're hoping that it certainly moderates the situation. I'm not expecting a big bonanza, a real dramatic rebound in water levels, just simply due to the fact that the fact that the spigots have been turned off really since the middle of July for a big swath of the Midwest, the whole area that really drains into the Mississippi River. And when that happens, the ground becomes more like one big dry sponge. And so any kind of rainfall that does occur, it's going to largely be absorbed into the ground, which is great for farm ground. We desperately need it, but there'll be less residual water available to feed into streams, into rivers, and as a result, elevate water levels. So we do expect some degree of relief. Obviously, we have some more rain in the forecast, which is obviously welcome. But again, I'm not expecting a significant and dramatic turnaround. And obviously, it's frustrating because this is the time of the year when we need our supply chain to be operating at full throttle. It's game time when it comes to agriculture. And now we're in the third year of having low water conditions on the Mississippi River, which is one of our main conduits for reaching international markets. It's kind of surprising in a way because, in the spring and in the early summer, we actually had an abundance of precipitation. The drought monitor maps had reversed course, which was all welcome. We even had flooding events in late June and dramatically so, and in early July. And then once we hit middle of July, then the spigots did get turned off. And so water levels have retreated as a result of that. Normally water levels on the river do diminish during this time of the year. It's more of a naturally dry time of the year. But what we've experienced is we're in that danger zone, which then triggers barge companies to have to adjust the amount of freight that they transport, the amount of barges they can attach in a single tow or unit. And that obviously diminishes the economics of barge transportation.
From what I understand, Mike, this current storm system moving through the central part of the country is going to dump the heaviest amounts in the southern half of the Mississippi Basin. That's not going to help too much further up north, even though they're getting rain. I don't think it's all that much, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the state of Iowa, and a lot of parts of the state received 1.5 inches to north of 2 inches, just this past night. And then with some significant rain yet to come this weekend. But yes, a lot of the more intense precipitation is going to happen further south. It's obviously, the more the merrier. But I think that we should just, resign ourselves and expect that we're going to continue to have reduced efficiency when it comes to barge transportation over these next couple months.
Well, what's the situation then as you go further south past New Orleans, let's say? A lot of soybeans end up going through the Panama Canal. Now, that was a real problem last year. Are they back to normal operating now?
Yeah, fortunately, that's been a bit of good news. The Panama really doesn't have, because it's so south and it's so tropical, they don't really have distinct spring, summer, fall, and winter like we do in the United States. They basically have the wet season and the dry season. And the dry season really starts from the middle of December to the end of April. And then the wet season is early May through mid-December. And there can be a pretty dramatic differential in the amount of rainfall that Panama receives between the wet season and the dry season. Dry season, you might get 2 to 3 inches a month. Well, and during the wet season, you're getting 10, upwards of 20 inches of rain per month. And so, fortunately, they did receive an increase in precipitation during the what's now still in the wet season. Some of their water mitigation and savings measures and management measures have been effective. So as a result, we're back to a normal number of transits on a daily basis, that 36 to 40, which is kind of the target number of transits per day. We're back to that. And so obviously that's really good news. But I think one of the important things is just to continue to remember is that there's a reason we use the metaphor supply chain. Because you've got a number of links and you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so, the goal is obviously to have all of those links be strengthened. And if you've got maybe positive developments in one area, but then you've got low water in the Mississippi River or another, constriction at some other place, then you're only as strong as your weakest link. So obviously it still remains a concern what we're seeing in the Mississippi River, but very glad that we're in a much better position in Panama than we were last year. Panama is a very important link in our supply chain. Soybeans are usually the number one agricultural customer of the Panama Canal, and so we're obviously happy to see that back to full operation.
Good deal. All right. What about freight rates for barge traffic and for ocean shipping? How are the freight rates here compared to normal?
Yeah, we're seeing barge freight rates still, higher than normal. Now, when you've got a reduction in barge capacity because you can't load as many soybeans or a tonnage of freight in a barge because you're concerned about water levels. And number two, if you have to restrict the number of barges you can attach together because the shipping channel is more narrow, what effectively has happened is you've reduced supply, you're maintaining demand, and then what happens usually in Economics 101 will tell us that puts upward pressure on costs, on rates. And we do continue to see that. Now, when you compare it over the last couple of years, it becomes less clear because we had low water events in 2022 and in 2023. So those were high rate events as well. So what the concern is that we're not where we normally are when it comes to barge freight rates. And, this is something that's really consequential to us because this is one of the reasons why the U.S. is so competitive on the international marketplace. You've got all of this production of soybeans and corn in the middle of the United States. We're far removed from our coastal regions. But then you've got this very efficient maritime highway called the Mississippi River that can basically negate a lot of those hundreds of miles and being able to effectively get it to those port areas so that then we can effectively compete in the international marketplace. So when you've got challenges when it comes to the Mississippi River, that obviously is a real concern for us. Ocean freight rates are less of a concern right now. There's still a lot of supply of ocean vessels to transport products across the oceans. There's some softening of the economy in certain areas of the country, the world. And so, that's less of a concern. It's really just some of those impediments of getting soybeans and agricultural products to the actual coasts, the port regions for that export market.
Well, we dodged a bullet with that port strike, the longshoreman strike a while back, but all it did was buy us time to get past the election. We're going to have to revisit that in January, aren't we?
Yeah, it wasn't a resolution. It was actually a rain check. It was actually just, postponed to January 15th. The two parties are negotiating, which is obviously good news. But the biggest concern I've always had, and I think that the biggest point of dispute that still remains not addressed, is the whole issue of automation. When you have a disagreement on wages and salaries, an observer can see how there might be a split the difference kind of opportunity, or a coming to some kind of compromise if the the port operators were offering a 50% increase in wages and salary. The labor union was advocating for more of a 75%. Well, they were able to get to 62%. Well, that's where you can see that there's more of a split the difference kind of opportunity. On automation and technology, it's more elusive, and from my perspective, because you've got one side that basically says we will not allow any more automation, any more technology to be employed, and even a threat to reverse some of those measures that have occurred in the past. It's always kind of challenging to understand, well, to what extent is it saber rattling, or to what extent is that more of an earnest, heels dug in kind of demand? But then, the port operators, they realize that they operate in a global marketplace. They see what's happening at ports around the world. They want to remain relevant and competitive. And so now all of a sudden, and automation is certainly a part of that. I understand that automation and technology, it's obviously disruptive. It's very stress inducing. And especially with the rise of artificial intelligence, the picture is very cloudy, in the future about what's going to happen with so many of these jobs. But my response to that is, that's true, but when has it not been the case? We've always had technology disrupt. We've always had automation disrupt. And so I guess we just have to best manage it moving forward. And so that's the real concern that I have, is where's the compromise opportunity when it comes to automation? My worry is that we could find ourselves in a very similar situation in the middle of January as we were a number of weeks ago. And now we will be past the presidential election. And obviously it depends on who wins the presidency and what the majorities in the House and the Senate are. But I think it's safe to say that there was more political pressure being exerted a few weeks ago because we were on the eve of a presidential election than there would be political pressure exerted after a presidential election. So that's another dynamic that has changed. And to what extent will policymakers in Washington, D.C. really be adamant about coming to an agreement and being willing to push for it?
Well, let's wrap this one up on a positive note. You had sent out a news release about a new project taking place in Washington State. Explain that. Tell us what it is and what they're doing. It could be a big help to the ag shipping.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to articulate is, one of the most effective ways of improving U.S. agriculture's ability to export, our competitiveness in the global marketplace, is to actually improve our transportation system. Because that's when you improve one of the links in our supply chain here in the United States, that's not going to benefit Brazilian soybeans, Argentinian soybeans. It's only going to benefit U.S. soybeans. And so that's something that we really are adamant about. The Pacific Northwest is the number 2 export region for soybeans, after the Mississippi Gulf. About 25% of our total exports leave from a collection of facilities in the Pacific Northwest, whether it's near Seattle, Washington, or near Portland, Oregon. One of these small port regions, but yet is very significant when it comes to soybean exports, is a port called the Port of Kalama. It's about 45 minutes away from Portland, Oregon, on the Columbia River. And they have a significant grain export facility there that's operated by the company TEMCO. And TEMCO stands for Tacoma Export Marketing Company. It's a joint venture between Cargill and CHS. So it's one of our main export terminals in this country, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest. And what they're endeavoring to do is expand the amount of rail track at that facility. The current challenge is, once you have a train loaded full of soybeans, or it could be wheat, it could be corn, and it's unloaded, they don't have sufficient trackage to pull that now empty train out of the way to allow a loaded train that's en route to actually come and unload. So they've got a real congestion point at that facility. And so by expanding that trackage, putting more siding, they can actually take these empty trains and get them out of the way so that you can keep that conveyor belt, if you will, rolling, with trains unloading and then getting out of the way and then being able to load ships. especially during this critical fall period for soybean exports, that October to January period. So what we did with soybean farmers is the Soy Transportation Coalition and then a handful of other soybean farmer organizations contributed $200,000 toward some of the pre-engineering and design expenses associated with this project, which is obviously helpful toward the project itself. But what was also meaningful is the Port of Kalama was applying for a grant through the U.S. Department of Transportation to help defray some of those expenses, a significant amount of those expenses. And one of the things that we've routinely observed is that when you have a grant applicant, and in this case it's the Port of Kalama, that grant application becomes more compelling and has a higher likelihood of success when you can demonstrate that there are other stakeholders that are putting skin in the game. And in this case, soybean farmers. And so that was the hope that by us soybean farmers being involved in this and actually making a financial contribution to it, that it would enhance the likelihood of that grant getting approved. It didn't totally ride on us. We just wanted to help assist with that grant getting approved. And we recently received notice that the port received the full grant request of $26.3 million. And so it's a real significant investment in the competitiveness of the U.S. soybean farmer. And it's just a good example of soybean farmers, a port, and the industry all coming together to advance a project that will provide tangible benefit to soybean farmers. This won't provide theoretical benefit. This will provide practical, tangible benefit. Farmers will be able to travel to that facility and see greater efficiency. It's estimated about 25 to 30% greater efficiency at this key export terminal because of this collaboration. And so it's something that we're very excited about.
Wow, congratulations on getting that through. And thanks for the update on that. I appreciate that very much. Hopefully we can see more of this in the future. So we'll see what it does to help the market out down the road. Is there a timeline on this?
Well, once now they've got the notice, they're really going to start. They've got the designs for it. So it's going to take at least a year for this to be completed. But it's, again, these infrastructure projects do take a considerable period of time. But, again, in the relatively near future, we'll be able to see an enhanced supply chain, and soybean farmers were a part of helping make that happen.
Well, you know the old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So anyway, keep it up. Good stuff. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the update. Mike Steenhoek with the Soybean Transportation Coalition. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks again for joining us. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock Channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.